even at this hour. In just the last hour or so, of course, building number 7, which is part of the complex there in the area, a 42-story building which had been expected to collapse, did just that. All this following a day of unprecedented terror, Britt, across Manhattan. It is my assumption now that I'm about to toss to another correspondent, though I've gotten no direction from anyone. And I can tell you that throughout the day, the emergency personnel have commandeered all of the taxi cabs in the city of Manhattan to be able to ferry rescue workers to and fro. Now we're waiting, as you may have reported to this point, for 2 aircraft carriers to make their way to New York Harbor, where it's our understanding. Yes, Britt.
It's Britt in Washington. I just want to interrupt you for a second because we're seeing now coming in here some remarkable pictures from earlier in the day. This is from the Fox 5 helicopter that patrols the skies over Washington. This is the Pentagon. That is the helipad. You see it there on the ground where the big white H is. You see the plume of smoke, and you see the damaged area of the Pentagon from the sky, and it gives you a very clear sense of where that airplane came in and hit. There you see, of course, the struts of the helicopter there. And you're hearing a little bit of the helicopter radio traffic. But that is what the situation looked like at the Pentagon this afternoon as firefighters labored to get that blaze that Brian Wilson was describing to you earlier under control. That airplane came right in over that green area, right along Route 395, just south of Washington. Very major commuter artery there. There you see the Potomac River in the background, and to the right, the runways of National Airport. And you can understand, Shep, how it would have been possible for air controllers and indeed even defense officials in Washington watching a plane approach along a path toward that Pentagon to believe that it was really just heading for National Airport and at the last minute veered off course. So you get a sense of how vulnerable in terms of its geographic location the Pentagon is to the kind of attack that was made today by a large aircraft. And then you see some of the rescue workers working there on the ground. These pictures, again, from our station WTTG Fox 5 here in Washington. There's the helipad, and there you see the area of impact and that enormous cavity in the wall where several stories of that building were simply gutted, knocked down, wiped out. Shep?
And we are left to wonder at this hour, Britt, whether those responsible for this attack knew what David Schuster has been reporting throughout the day, that in fact much of this area of the Pentagon had just been remodeled and refurbished, and much of it was empty, largely unoccupied at the time of this attack. The latest numbers on casualties that we've gotten, and they are in flux, and I hesitate to even mention them as due to the fact that they will certainly be changing, but largely unoccupied. By some stroke of luck, this plane went into the one section of the Pentagon where it could do the least amount of human damage. That is not the case on the southern tip of Manhattan. Our understanding is that on a given day, 50,000 people should have been inside that business, inside those 2 buildings there, working. That's not to mention building number 7, which later collapsed this afternoon. 50,000 people, plus the tourists who flocked to this building to go to the observation tower, and I dare say a number of people in our viewing audience have been to the top and have taken photos from that place and have seen the expansive view with Lady Liberty just below. All of that now down in rubble. Certainly one bit of good news is that the large tourist influx which we have prior to Labor Day, which would have left long lines at that building waiting on the observation deck, all of those tourists for the most part are gone. School has started back in most parts of the country, and where on a Tuesday morning 1 week ago, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, you would have had literally thousands of people, tourists from across the country waiting to get to that observation deck. We can hope and pray that that is not the case today. As you stand on the corner on our building in Midtown Manhattan and look south, the smoke is still rising in an enormous new dust cloud which came with the falling of building number 7, that 42-story structure just around the corner from there. That enormous tower of smoke is still in the air, much of it ash, with an east wind taking it away from Manhattan and off to the sides, as rescue workers will no doubt toil throughout the evening. The number of people brought to hospitals seems incredibly low, in the low hundreds, given our knowledge that literally tens of thousands of people were inside. Now, One good part of all of this is the first two crashes. The crash of the first jet was followed by the second some 10 minutes later. That allows a number of people to get out. And this morning on the way as I rushed into work was hearing firsthand accounts. One from a lady who was in the second tower, which had not yet been hit by a plane. She was on the 92nd story and was able to walk down all 92nd floors. And she was describing a sort of ordered chaos within the stairwells of this 110-story structure, as literally thousands of people were able to make it out of that second structure long before that jet plowed into the building. We have so many different camera angles of this, and we have slowed them down and looked at them very closely. And it would appear that as the jet goes into the second tower, the West Tower down at the World Trade Center, that enormous 767's nose goes into, not from this angle, but you can see on another angle, coming in one side and the nose literally plucking out the other. Is it possible that that's an optical illusion? Certainly. But imagine the speed at which it was flying, this airborne bomb loaded with fuel, ready to travel across country, and instead exploding in the middle of that building. Now, there were thousands of people below the area where the planes crashed into the building. You can see the first one is quite high, the second one somewhat lower, and people below that, presumably, and we are told by good authority from downtown that many thousands of people were able to get out unharmed before the two structures collapsed. What seems clear now is that an untold number of rescue personnel, New York's finest and New York's bravest, both at the foot of that building, working feverishly to get inside to help those who were trying to get out, when World Trade Center, all 110 stories, crumbled down on top of them. The cleanup and rescue effort is just beginning, and the ramifications of all this being seen now across the seas in Afghanistan, where it would appear at least the night skies have lit up and something has happened. Explosions can be heard north of Kabul, Afghanistan, in the vicinity of the airport. Large plumes of smoke can be seen in the direction of the airport. An Associated Press reporter is coming to the city, and a story is upcoming. So the latest we know is, and thanks to our colleagues at CNN for those pictures, and that familiar face who showed up somehow on our air, thanks to them for those pictures, and word now that it would appear at least that America may have struck back, Britt.
Well, Shep, obviously we await word on that from some authoritative source, which we've not yet heard. These developments here in Washington and New York, as you may well be able to imagine, making headlines. The Washington Post, which obviously had gone to press before these events happened this morning, has rushed out a special late edition of the paper. And I just thought I would show you. We had some on tape, but there's what that headline looks like. As you see, the headline, "Terror Hits Pentagon World Trade Center," with a big picture similar to the ones that we've been showing you all day long. Now, obviously, the implications of this, we're hearing now from Capitol Hill, and reflected in the words of the President, the sense that the United States is not going to take this terrorist attack lying down, that those responsible will be hunted down, as the President said, that there will be some kind of retaliation. But it's a difficult question how to retaliate at a time like this. You're hearing the members of Congress say this is an act of war. This is comparable to Pearl Harbor. Of course, the day after Pearl Harbor, the United States declared itself at war with Japan. But what kind of a declaration of war would someone make? What kind of an official act could Congress pass at a time like this? For some possible answers to that, let's bring in Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is a terrorism authority and formerly chair of a national commission on this subject. Mr. Ambassador, what about this? What does a nation do if it's trying to make a decisive response to events like this?
Well, first of all, it is an act of war. There's no question about that in my mind. And once we determine who did it or what group or what states were involved, I would hope that we will retaliate with the most vigorous and broad-ranging military response that we can come up with to make the point the President has made earlier today, that we simply can't tolerate this kind of action.
We don't have a long history in recent years, Mr. Ambassador, of being able to identify particularly well the sources of such terrorism. We've done it in some cases. We did it in the case of Libya and that discotheque bombing.
Well, actually, that's not right. In terms of the major attacks, we've been very good. We know who did the attack on the Marine barracks in 1983, the Libyan disco attack in Berlin, Pan Am 103, the World Trade Center bombing, the East African bombings, the Khobar Towers. In fact, the record is pretty good. The record is pretty good. We will find out who did this. I'm confident.
We will find this out to the kind of certainty where we would be able to target with precision the perpetrators, find them, and attack them?
I'm absolutely confident we will find out who did it, and then we will go after the perpetrators wherever they are, and I would hope that we would conclude that any state which was involved in any way, giving any kind of support or safe haven to that group, will pay the ultimate price.
Is it conceivable to you, sir, that these flashes in the sky that we're seeing in the night above the airport or in the airport area around Kabul, Afghanistan, represent some kind of an American? There you see, you can see some of that now on our screen, courtesy of CNN, blazes and flashes in the sky. Is it conceivable to you, sir, that this represents some kind of an American counterattack or response, or is it too soon to imagine that that would have occurred?
I think it's probably too early for that to be an American response. There's an awful lot of unrest in Afghanistan all the time. But the key here is not that. The key is not the retaliation. It's important. The key is to be able to prevent attacks on Americans so American citizens don't die. And that requires better intelligence than we have on terrorist groups. The National Commission on Terrorism, which I chaired, made some important recommendations on improving this intelligence, and I hope that those recommendations will now be acted on. They haven't been acted on in the last year.
Well, give me a sense, then, of what step one for you would be. You're standing next to the President of the United States for the sake of this discussion, and he says, sir, what's the first thing I should do?
First thing you got to do is figure out who did it, and that involves going back through the intelligence that's been coming in over the last year and seeing if we missed anything. It means coordinating with the law enforcement as they begin to look into these hijackings to see where those trails lead, and they will lead somewhere. These people had to buy tickets and show identification. We will find out something. And then once you know where it is, you have to get a very broad-ranging retaliation, at which point I certainly hope that all these countries who are today expressing sympathy and support for us will still be with us, because we will know who our real friends are when the retaliation starts.
Now, let me ask you this question about the hijackings themselves. Obviously, there's some mystery. We thought in America that we had conquered this problem. We had airport security that was tight, and you couldn't get aboard an airplane with any kind of metal on you or anything that would be any kind of weapon. What would be your estimate as to how this hijacking was able to be executed?
It's hard to say, but it's obvious, in addition to an intelligence failure, we have a catastrophic airport security failure here with 4 hijackings in one day. I travel a lot, as many people do, and of course I've noticed that it's often the case that the people in charge and conducting these searches are not always as attentive as they should be. It's possible that these people got on board without real weapons and used fake weapons, weapons they could get through the X-ray machines. We just don't know at this point. But it's clear there is a catastrophic security failure which is going to have to be gotten to the bottom of.
Would it be your guess, based upon the magnitude of the attack, the precision with which it was executed, that is there anybody you can think of beside Osama bin Laden who might have been behind it?
Yes, I think at this point there's a list, it's a short list of 3 or 4 possibilities. Bin Laden is certainly suspect number 1. It's also possible some of the groups in the Middle East, the more radical Palestinian groups, could possibly have conducted such an attack.
How likely would it?
Well, you can't say. At this point, you're just asking for who could do it, and they're
Gotcha.
capable. And Iraq would be the 3rd on the list. It's clear Saddam Hussein, or a state, Iraq and Iran, would be the 4th. Would have this kind of capability. I think it's unlikely that the Iranians are behind it, but I wouldn't at this point, if I were advising the president, I don't think one would exclude any of those suspects yet.
All right. Paul Bremer, very, very useful information and analysis. Thank you very much, sir. Let me turn now to Senator Bob Graham of Florida, a Democratic senator. Senator, there's been a lot of talk on Capitol Hill, and you just heard it reflected in the remarks of Mr. Bremer, that this was an act of war. Other members of the Senate have said as much today, sir. Would you concur in that assessment?
Absolutely. This is the most serious attack against the United States since Pearl Harbor, and I believe we should respond as aggressively as we did against the Japanese.
Well, if Congress were to meet tonight or tomorrow and pass something, what would it say?
Well, we're going to meet tomorrow, and we'll pass a resolution which will basically be a statement of sympathy to the victims, and as well as a commitment of the United States to assure that its honor and the justice to those victims is secured. But beyond that, there are some important things we need to do. I agree with Ambassador Bremer as to the state of our intelligence and the fact that we need to make a serious investment in upgrading our human intelligence, the ability to get a human being inside one of these terrorist cells to understand their motivations and intentions so that we can interdict before we have to deal with the rubble of a World Trade Center. We also need to make a greater investment in our technology, particularly our eavesdropping technology, which used to be the state of the art for the world, but which has degraded over recent years. And finally, we need to make an investment in the analysis of all the information that we collect.